Story connects people with one another through the emotional content of it. I mean, we are all human beings. We all have our life stories, things that we're proud of, things that we're not proud of. And the stories connect us because my life experience and your life experience may be somewhat similar.
I realized how important story is to people, mostly working with children. I have learned that children love to tell a story and love to tell their story. And I found that in settings of children in worship, children's Sunday school, when they're given the room to share their story, then the teacher is offered an opportunity to engage with them in their story, and then they're much more receptive. There's just no comparison to a lesson that's told through story than a lesson that's just taught outright. Children engage, children participate, and everyone wants to tell their story. And I think when people are allowed to tell their story and their stories are heard, they feel accepted and engaged and loved.
When was the time that I realized story was important in somebody else's life? It probably happened at the last church that I served. A lady came up to me and she happened to be in my choir. In my choir, when I teach a song, I usually give some biblical reference before, and I stop intermittently between teaching the songs to explain a phrase or two and to share what that actually means to everyday life. She came up to me maybe a week after we had sung a song that I had explained maybe 4 weeks earlier, and she explained how important that had been in her own processing who she was in Christ, in her own processing who God was to her in the situation that she was going through. Very, very dismal situation. But she explained how important that storytelling had been to her. And that's when I knew. I said, okay, God, it's more than just singing. It's more than just communicating about who you are. It's about allowing people's lives to be changed through the power of the storytelling or narrative of the gospel. Don't only tell it with your mouth. One of the things that I find, and maybe it's because of who I am, I use my hands a lot, I use facial expressions, but I've come also in the worship service to use things beyond singing and vocal liturgy. I use smell. Touch is important. So I remember a service that I did around the Holy Week that people had to actually touch nails or taste some vinegar from a sponge that reminded them of the stations or the walk that Christ did through the Via Dolorosa. So it's important that people not just when storytelling, that it's not just about the ear, it's about the total embodiment of the person. And you actually want to capture that whole part of the storytelling, and so that people can understand that God is not just a one-dimensional God, but God is a complete God.
One of the ways we do that is with what's called response time. After the lesson has been taught or the story's been told, the children have some time to act out the story themselves. They can use characters, wooden figures. They can use art materials. They can use headphones and an audio tape of the story so that they can experience it in a way that's appropriate to their learning style, appropriate to their own way of being part of something. The whole point is engaging with children in a way that allows them to see the love of Christ in us. That's the point. It doesn't matter what the story is. It doesn't matter whether they can memorize and remember the story on their way home and tell it to their parents. What matters is that they came to a place where someone who loved them shared Christ with them in a meaningful way. I would say that the first thing that comes to mind is not memorizing the stories. If you can know your story without, reading it and looking up and down, the children can engage and not be distracted by you flipping pages and that sort of thing.
I think there are probably 3 vital areas in telling a good story. The first one is to capture their attention, sometimes subtly, sometimes instantly. At times it may take a while, but you've got to capture their attention. I think the second most important thing is you've got to stick to what it is you're talking about. So don't vary. I think one of the biggest errors that people make when telling stories is they go off on tangents. And that could be helpful in some ways, but a lot of ways it's often it's distracting, or it takes people away from what's going on for the thing. And I think the third one is to end before they end. I think sometimes pastors, singers, choirs, and teachers often go beyond the level of what the participant can take. And that in and of itself could either make the story moot or could make it ineffective.
Being too worried about how they look or how it comes across or the whole, are they getting it or not? And they're not enjoying themselves, because a good storyteller always enjoys the storytelling, enjoys the process, and lets it be light and flow from their inner soul.
Let's see. There is this thing about Moses and the Israelites. So there's slavery that has some issues. There's this thing about the ark with death and all of that comes with it. Now, no, those are common children's stories that are told. But there are a few that I might stay away from and let them unfold in the natural process of when they get older, when they're more developed.
Sure, there are lots of stories that are inappropriate for children. There's stories of rape and murder and death all through the Bible. There are stories of the evil of humanity. And those are perhaps a little bit too abstract for children, because they tend to be very concrete in their thinking at this phase in their development. But as they get older, we have to have that commitment to lifelong learning, so that when they're in their teenage years and when they are older, we can engage some of that more difficult material, maybe from the pulpit or in an adult education class. And it's in that context that we can wrestle with some of those issues.
I don't know that I would say the stories themselves are inappropriate. I think it's how deep do we go with the story, and how much do we interpret the story in a way that children can understand and relate to. Surely we're not going to read verbatim Song of Songs into a second grade classroom. It's going to be confusing for them. They're not going to understand it. But I think there is a place for perhaps a story like that, or a story of David and Bathsheba. That's not a story that you would necessarily tell outright to children, but there is a way to share that information about who David was and who Bathsheba was, and what the consequences of their behavior was, and how that played into the whole history of our faith. Yeah, I think that's appropriate. It just depends how you do it, and with a sensitivity to the level of your students.